Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you to our webinar, Mapping the Future, Planning Energy Infrastructure with Space and Nature in Mind. My name is Andrzej Ceglarz, and I work as a Director of Energy Systems at Renewables Grid Initiative. And today I'm going to moderate the webinar, our best practice webinar, and I will explain in a second the entire concept and why we are here today. Before we start, there are a few housekeeping rules just for information, and you must have received this notification while entering the meeting. This webinar is recorded and will be published afterwards on RGI website and YouTube channel. It's to share the practice and the knowledge and the discussion that will take place today. You are kindly asked to keep your microphone off, but also you are encouraged to put the camera on so we could see some of the people attending today's webinar. We also encourage you to rename yourself, to include your name and organization. It's for the discussion afterwards, so we know also who you are and what kind of organization you represent. And also, if you have any question, you can use two options. The first one is using either the chat option or the reaction. You can raise your hand, and then you will be given the floor to speak up. The agenda for today's webinar, it's very short. After the short welcome and also setting the scene and explaining a bit of the context of the webinar, we will move directly to presentation of two of our great speakers today. The first one will be Alice Etheridge from NESO, the British TSO, National Energy System Operator, who will be explaining the strategic spatial energy plan methodology. And afterwards, the floor will be taken by Felix Jakob Fliegner from 50 Hertz, one of the German transmission system operators that will shed some lights and make his intervention about and holistic planning of offshore infrastructure. After these two presentations, there will be a Q&A session, and as you can see, we dedicated some substantial time for this, so we encourage you to be active participants, and also please we also encourage you to raise your hands so we have a dynamic discussion during this session. So that's the plan for today's afternoon. But before moving to the presentation, I would like to give a short introduction to RGI, Renewables Grid Initiative, who we are and why we are doing this webinar today. So RGI is a quite unique organization within the landscape of the energy transition because we serve as an association that brings together transmission system operators as well as climate and environmental NGOs across Europe to work together for sustainable grid development. Our organization is driven by solutions. We focus very much on the implementation, and we tried to structure our work across three different dimensions: technical, environmental, and societal. The first one, technical, focuses on grids and energy systems and deals with enabling discussions on how to model, plan, and implement, optimize, and decarbonize energy systems. So today's presentations are perfectly suited for that. Environmental one looks on the implementation of the energy systems, both onshore and offshore, to be aligned with nature and biodiversity targets, which we also mention about in this today's discussion. And the third one, societal, looks how to involve citizens, how to enable civil society to be involved in the decision-making processes in the energy transition. And the tools presented today also give an opportunity for this. This webinar, it's part of our other activities, of our other projects that are related to sharing best practices. So what we aim at is to collect best practices that are being implemented by grid operators, but also NGOs and other actors that would allow for such implementation of the energy infrastructure. And we are talking about them. We're organizing the webinars like the one today. We are collecting these best practices in our database available online. We are producing reports. We are organizing workshops, but we're also organizing every year RGI Best Practice Grid Awards. This year, the ceremony, as usually, will take place at the beginning of December during the PCI days. All these activities are taking part of our societal dimension. But the technical one, it's divided into four work streams that all of them contribute to the overall objective, how to plan, design, implement, and better understand challenges and opportunities related to optimize the energy system. And one of the topics within this work stream that we are dealing with is spatial optimization, or how we call it, energy and space. When we are looking into solutions, approaches, methodologies that allow for the best use of space while planning and then implementing the infrastructure. And why is it so? It is because space is a limited resource. There is already existing intense use of space, both on land and on the seas, that is being occupied by other activities, not only for electricity infrastructure, but which also includes biodiversity protection and restoration, development of renewables that should go hand in hand with renewables with grids development. There's agriculture, shipping and fisheries, offshore, urban, suburban development, many different activities. Therefore, while thinking about the system that should be implemented on the spot, space should be taken into account. And this is not something new that we are talking about at RGI. We've been dealing more intense with the topic since more than 2 years. In September 2023, we organized in Brussels a public workshop dedicated to energy and space, during which we presented our analysis and the interactive tool. So all research was taking place even before, where we analyzed 4 different decarbonization scenarios and what kind of spatial needs implications they would bring, depending how much infrastructure would need to be developed. Those results were published not only in the report, but also in a shorter form in a fact sheet, and also in one of our videos with the results and the call for action. All these resources are available on our website, so you're also invited to explore them more. Last year, we also continued the discussions related to the optimal use of the space. We were looking into the regulatory developments related to accelerated permitting, especially as the provisions of the Renewables Directive related to both renewable acceleration areas as well as the not obligatory grid acceleration areas. And this year, we already organized an expert workshop on integrated offshore energy planning in Brussels, which was organized in collaboration with Wind Europe. So all these activities they learned as they told us that dealing with the challenge of space is relevant one, is important one, and what we need to look into holistic and integrated approaches that would allow to plan the system and use the space in a way that would move beyond isolated and project-based solutions, and where spatial constraints are being tackled from the very beginning, as well taking into account the interests of communities and nature. And I think that I will stop here because we should move to our highlights of this webinar, to the first presentation. And I'm very happy to introduce and give the floor to Alice Etheridge, who is head of strategic spatial energy planning at NESO, and will give us the presentation to the methodology that NESO is developing. So I'm finishing here, and I stop sharing the screen, and Alice, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andre. Appreciate your introduction, and I think you've lined up my session really well as to why we're doing strategic spatial energy planning within Great Britain. So before I get going, I'll introduce myself. I'm Alice Etheridge. Hi everyone, and I head up the strategic spatial energy planning programme within the National Energy System Operator in Great Britain. And I'm going to cover three things in my presentation. So the first is what NESO is, for those of you who aren't familiar with us. We are a just over 1 year old organisation, so may not be known to everyone. What we're doing on strategic energy planning in Great Britain, with a focus on the strategic spatial energy plan, and then, as Andre says, look at how we're delivering the strategic spatial energy plan. So hopefully you can all see my slides. Yeah, great, I've got a nod there. So I will go through them. So as I say, for those who aren't aware of us, we are the National Energy System Operator, and we were a newly created organisation last October. You may have come across us previously as part of the National Grid Group as the Electricity System Operator. We are now an independent public corporation, really sitting at the heart of the energy system in Great Britain. So I think probably the key bit here is that we cover not just electricity, but also natural gas and recently announced hydrogen planning. So that allows us to take that whole system view, where we can make sure that we play our role in with everyone in Great Britain being able to access reliable, clean and affordable energy. So we've got a range of duties. So our primary duties are around that energy trilemma, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, playing our role in the delivery of net zero by 2050, which is enshrined in UK law, ensuring that that outcome is efficient and economic and affordable for our consumers, and then also ensuring that that supply is secure. And we have some secondary duties as well, as you can see there. And there's a number of activities that make up that the NESO that we do, sort of split roughly half and half into that sort of more real-time operation side of things, and then on the left-hand side where we're going to focus today on that planning side, where I won't go around all of these here because I know we want to focus in on strategic planning. So but this fits within our sort of the more longer-term planning side of NESO. So why is strategic energy planning being introduced in Great Britain, and why and what forming that? So I think we're not alone in being in this situation, that the systems we've got, the structures in GB have served us well to get us to this point in terms of changing our energy system from one very heavily based on fossil fuels to one that's getting us towards a decarbonised energy system to sit within that wider decarbonised economy context to get us to net zero by 2050. But what we've recognised is that actually we've come a long way, but we need to go a lot further and a lot quicker than we have to date. So strategic energy planning is being introduced. It was initially talked about in a Electricity Network Commissioner's recommendation report a couple of years ago, to help get the electricity transmission network in place ahead of or in time for the renewable electricity that tends to be developed quicker. We're seeing lots of constraints and bottlenecks in GB, so that was proposed, but actually it's taken on a much greater role since then, with the intention that actually it helps to a greater extent than was probably envisaged initially to direct the generation and storage across the country to the more beneficial locations for it. So our strategic energy planning in GB is made up of 3 elements. So in the middle is what we're going to focus on today, is our strategic spatial energy plan, and within that we are going to set out a view out to 2050 of potential electricity and hydrogen generation and storage infrastructure for Great Britain, and I'll go on to that in more detail in a moment. That will feed into the bottom left directly into our transmission network planning. So that's although we're not looking at natural gas in this first SSEP, at least will feed in the electricity and hydrogen element, so that will develop that network infrastructure proposals are sort of the big strategic side of things. And I should also have said the SSEP covers both the onshore and the offshore, as do our network plans, and that's our network plan there is called the Centralised Strategic Network Plan. And then on the bottom right we have regional energy strategic plans are also being introduced. So whereas the first 2 I've talked about sort of give that top-down national view, the regional energy strategic plans really understand those plans at the regional, the local level, and we will bring the national and that regional level together to hopefully get to something that's consistent and works across the whole of the country. And the SSEP will also feed into the regional energy strategic plans. So these are all new, all being introduced in a 3-yearly cycle, starting with the SSEP first of all. So let's look in a bit more detail on what the strategic spatial energy plan is. So as you can see here, it's intended to contribute, as I've sort of highlighted, to accelerate that clean, affordable and secure energy, really by providing more confidence and certainty sort of early on around what might be expected in that generation and supply space, to help our regulator have that confidence to approve the transmission network investment that comes from it. It will look on a locational basis, but that will be in zones. We're not going to come out with specific project locations. I'll show you the zones in a moment. We will look at providing a view on capacities and technologies over different time periods for that electricity and hydrogen generation and storage. And then hopefully that will be endorsed by the UK, the Scottish and the Welsh governments, and also by Ofgem, our regulator, so that it really does provide that confidence to industry, to communities, to the regulator, that this is the direction of travel that all those key bodies should be pulling in to progress towards it in GB. So what are we looking at? I've touched on some of these already, actually. So it is for the whole of Great Britain, onshore and offshore. So for us, certainly something that's never been done before. We are, in terms of the process, which I will come on to in a moment, it is looking both at economic analysis, so having really that cost to consumers at the heart of what it's doing, but also bringing in those practicalities that Andre has talked about. So making sure that what we're coming out with fits with what's already there or planned in terms of the natural environment, where people live, other sectors' uses, whether that's farming, fishing, tourism and leisure, trying to really have taken those different uses of the land and sea into account in developing the plan, so that it is all looked at as a whole much earlier in the development process than has previously been the case in Britain. And then, as I say, it will look to 2050, but also we will iterate it. So every 3 years, come back and check that what's there is still valid, and look at what decisions need to be taken, really, to make sure that the decisions that need to be taken on a long lead time are getting taken. I think, again, I've touched on lots of these, so I probably won't focus any further, but I think probably, well, 2 bits to highlight is that we'll also be bringing in deliverability, making sure that we're not coming out with something that someone says, oh, but have you seen the supply chain for that? It's not going to be realistic. And this is all sort of underpinned by ensuring that we recommend a secure energy system for the future. So I said I'd get onto the publication zones. This just gives you an idea of sort of the level of granularity, the level of detail we'll be coming out with our results in. So it's a mix of black and red lines, and that sort of reflects its origin. So it was difficult in GB. We have lots of different zones already, several energy or electricity system zones. We have different zones or different ways to split the country up for our planning systems or administrative boundaries. And we've tried to bring those together and balance them without sort of coming up with something that doesn't make sense in either world. So we took as our starting point the regional energy strategic plans, nations and regions, which there are 11 of those, and those are indicated by the black lines here. But then we found, actually, because we want this to give signals that are helpful to the energy industry, we also needed to break up some of those regions and nations further, so that we could give those right signals, particularly to the electricity industry. And that's where those red lines come in. We sort of further subdivided those to get to 19 onshore zones. We will also have 6 offshore zones, which haven't shown here. We're just sort of in the final stages of communicating those to some of our key stakeholders before sharing externally, but those will come together, and that will be the structure of our outputs, our recommendation and analysis, balancing, as I say, the energy system and those sort of administrative boundary or those planning system splits. Now we're taking a 6-phased approach to delivery. Which I'll go into all of these in more detail in a moment. As you can see, we prepare, we model, and actually it's not as linear as this suggests. Our model and appraise are very sort of interactive and iterative. So those are going on at the moment and sort of bounce back between one another. We will be carrying out a public consultation next year. So this will allow us to put the draft plan out and get a whole range of stakeholders' views on that. And I will touch later on the breadth of the stakeholders we're talking to here. We'll then, as you'd expect, on the back of that consultation, refine based on the feedback we receive, and then we will publish that finalised report. And all of these activities are underpinned by really robust stakeholder engagement, formal and informal environmental assessments, and I'll talk again about those in a moment. Assurance, we know that this is going to be under a lot of scrutiny, and quite rightly. Billions of pounds worth of investment that could potentially going to be taken on the back of this. So we've got really robust assurance processes, and also reflecting that the role for it in future. There's obviously a lot of interest. So we have strong internal governance, but also governance with the UK, Scottish and Welsh governments and Ofgem. And I should have started off by saying we were co-commissioned to carry this out by those 3 government organisations. And the intention is at the end, fingers crossed, if we get all of this right, that those 3 governments plus Ofgem will endorse the plan to give it that real weight and status. So here's the governance. I probably won't dwell in more detail, but these are our external governance groups. So these are those ones with the commissioning organisations and Ofgem. And then also we have at the bottom right-hand side, some of those stakeholder groups that we bring into this. And apologies, I should have said I've got 2 screens where my slides are on the other screen. So if I'm looking away, I'm just sort of referring to my slides. So if we go on to the next one, I'm going to start going through those 6 stages of the process. So first of all, we've got prepare, which is we've completed this, we've carried it out, and that was really, you know, as it says on the tin, getting us set up to deliver. So making sure we've got the right data inputs, we've got our tools and our tools set up to deliver that. So our economic model and our spatial evaluation model, and how we're going to iterate between those, and then also how we're going to, you know, we don't just take what comes from the model, how we are going to appraise and really add that sort of human testing, challenge and logic to the modelling that we get. Also making sure we understand the government policies that we want to test against, or sort of understand and ask those questions around, so that when we get into that analysis, we are ready to go. Also, as part of that, we agreed sort of our starting point, what do we take as assumed is going to have happened, and that's we're taking our government's Clean Power 2030 action plan as the starting point for that. So then once we've got all that preparation done, we start the modelling, which is, as you might expect, a large part of what we're doing. And this, I should say, although this diagram isn't the most simplest in its form here, it's also doesn't necessarily, or doesn't reflect sort of a lot of these steps are iterative and sort of going backwards and forwards and round in circles, but hopefully gives you that idea. So once we've got everything set up, we know those questions we want to ask the model. I'll go on to it in a moment as well. We set up our economic model with what we call spatial exclusions. So we set it up in a way that means it cannot come out with capacities of particular technologies that just wouldn't be feasible either legally or physically from a sort of spatial perspective, and those are our exclusions. And then we get some initial results. We then apply the next layer of geospatial input. So we bring in those constraints and look at actually where would it be quite difficult to build particular generational storage types, and therefore that ideally you're not allowing a capacity in that zone that sort of tips over that really difficult to build threshold. And then we sort of go, as I say, go around in circles, iterate, keep refining both of those bits, understanding those results as we're getting them, where we might want to flex different questions in different ways, so that we can then come to those modelling outputs, get ourselves down to between 4 and 6 pathways, which is the requirement we have to put to the UK Energy Secretary to make their decision on. And then keep sort of refining those down, making sure we're carrying out security of supply assessments, we're carrying out those deliverability assessments and the like. I'm going to go into some of these in a bit more detail as I've been talking to that. I've realised it doesn't necessarily entirely make sense without a bit more detail, and we can always loop back to this. So we'll start off with our environmental assessments, because I know there's interest in this group. So we are carrying actually 3 environmental assessments out here, but we've sort of only focused on 2 because the third one is GB legislation rather than European. So we're carrying out a strategic environmental assessment as part of the whole process, looking at the recommend or the chosen option, but also those reasonable alternatives, and bringing into that the required public consultation, which I've mentioned already, and we've also carried out statutory consultations with the relevant statutory environmental bodies. We're also carrying out habitats regulations assessment. So as I'm sure lots of people here are familiar with those. On a plan level, we're doing this strategically, so that we understand the likely effects on European designated sites, obviously not getting down to project level, but understanding sort of within the zones we're using, the potential sort of proportion of land use within those and how that might fit with those designated sites. And then we're also carrying out, which isn't on here, a marine conservation zone assessment. And then this combined with what we call our spatial evaluation framework. So that's where we bring in all those different other sort of uses or potential uses of the land and the sea together, which, because we're focusing on environment here, that's those protected sites, those special natural environment areas. All of this comes together so that the environment is considered as we as we think about the energy infrastructure of the future. And it's not just then left to those individual project assessments at the end. You can take that step back and look at the plans for the country as a whole. And I know that's something certainly our government has struggled with previously, is that they'll get individual projects sort of coming forward for consideration, which by themselves might be fine, but actually when you bring those together with all the other projects that might be coming forward, they're probably less fine. So hopefully helping provide that greater level of information up front. So going then a bit more into detail on the spatial evaluation. So I touched earlier on the exclusions, and these are the bits, as I say, where we take out sort of land areas, if you like, that are available for energy infrastructure to be built on, just because we know it's legally or physically impossible. And we look at those around 4 sort of different indicators that we've called our pillars that underpin our analysis. So we have technical, design, engineering requirements. So that's really, what do the different technologies need? What are the characteristics of their generation or storage type, that and what does that mean for where they're located? For example, pump storage is a good one. We know we can't locate that sort of in a flat area without water, so making sure that there is appropriate terrain for those different technology types. The other spatial uses is as it sounds, what's planned for water usage, what's planned for farming, fishing, the other pieces I touched on earlier. There's that societal pillar, so how what's already sort of used for people living or leisure, or there's elements around people. And then the environment we've touched on, those natural environment considerations. So these all come together, sort of layers that come together, and then we get sort of maps. As you can see here, these are very much illustrative, that help us understand those exclusions where we can't build, and then sort of the flip side of what is the potential developable area in a particular zone. We then sort of go on to that less hard element that I touched on, sort of those constraints and opportunities. So in our suitability criteria, where we have push and pull factors. So constraints are those push factors where we say, ideally avoid this area. The opportunities are those pull factors where it might be ideally suited to a particular technology. So we gather lots and lots of data. I think the last I heard it was about 400 data sets in our geospatial analysis, where we can then represent that balance between where's better, where's not so good, to help us score and understand the potential developable area in particular parts of the country. So that all comes together. That's those the economic and the geospatial analysis sort of iterate together. I haven't got much more detail on our economic analysis, but we use the energy market model Plexos to optimize and bring together electricity and hydrogen. So we look at those as a co-optimized model, and also we look at the location of generation compared to where the demand is located, and do that trade-off between, say, generation being closer to demand and requiring less network to transport it, versus being further away where maybe the renewable energy sources are better but requires additional network infrastructure. So that's all comes together. We then take those modelling outputs, which I should add have also had some thought put to them. It's not just what's spat out of the model, but then we take that and apply that extra level of scrutiny and robustness testing to get down to results through our appraise phase, and work through to get from a very long list of pathway options down to that 4 to 6 to send to the Secretary of State for their decision. Sorry, Natalie, I'm trying to keep an eye on time, but I actually didn't clock what time I needed to be finished by. Am I okay still to keep talking?
So we are a bit delayed, so we can speed up, but
Yeah.
I think that we can also be quite flexible with
Okay.
timing, so.
Okay, I'll keep going. I'm almost finished. It was just how much detail I went into on this. So
Yeah.
we've got lots of give me a wave if I'm talking for too long. We've got lots of engagement going on throughout the process, not just at the consult phase, but as we go through and develop the modelling and the pathways and appraise those. And that's a whole range of stakeholders. So with our energy industry stakeholders, we have a working group, we run workshops, webinars, one-to-one sessions to ensure that we are understanding their views and helping us really refine on that deliverability aspect in particular. We have 14 societal groups which provide different inputs from different perspectives across society. So we have the likes of farmers and other users of the land. We have users of the sea. We have those who may be in fuel poverty, representatives of leisure and tourism, really bringing those different perspectives into the development of the SSEP. We also, as we get further through the process, will talk to what we're calling host areas, so representatives of areas that might host different amounts, or sorry, might have infrastructure in their area for the first time, or be expected to accommodate large amounts of infrastructure, just to understand and test their views, and also help with that sort of journey of messaging, help sort of lay the foundations for the project specific engagement that comes later. And then I've touched on, we also engage with those formal environmental bodies, and that will come together as well in the formal consultation next year. On the back of that, as I've talked about, we'll take account of that feedback and then publish our final strategic spatial energy plan, hopefully with the endorsement of the UK, Scottish and Welsh governments and Ofgem. So this is my last slide, you'll be pleased to hear. Just to sort of get your eye in on where we are, we've got our methodology published. So anybody wanting to have some nice bedtime reading and find out more about that, that's on our website. And I can also drop a link in the chat if helpful. And we're currently working on refining down those 4 to 6 pathway options to submit to the UK Energy Secretary so that we can consult next year and then put out our final plan. So hopefully that's given you a good introduction to what we're doing in Britain on the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan. Apologies if I've run over slightly, and I will stop talking now.
Thank you very much, Ingrid, for this comprehensive presentation, which also shows a very complex process that you are going through. And also, don't worry, we are not so much late. And I agree with on the comments that you received that it was very interesting. So it's good that we didn't skip any of the slides. And before moving to the discussion, I would like to introduce a second of our speaker, Felix Jakob Fliegner, who is going to make his intervention about holistic planning of offshore infrastructure, also referring to the work that he's doing at 50 Hertz, one of the German transmission system operators, and also reflecting upon what was presented by Alice. So yes, so Felix, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andre. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll just share my screen, and while that's happening, I can say that I'm happy to join this webinar and would like to give a very short intervention, a deep dive into our work related to spatial planning and more generally system development and system planning. Please confirm that you can see my slide. At the moment, it's only the video. Maybe I restart again the window. Should be working now. Excellent. Good. I will take you offshore. That's basically due to the reason that I'm working on offshore topics, but the general, let's say, line of thought that Alice already introduced is valid, as she mentioned already, both onshore and offshore. So it's just another way of illustrating our points. And the three main points that I would like you to take away from this little intervention, I will bring straight ahead in the beginning so that we don't lose track of these. So the first thing I would like to highlight in this little talk is that we believe automating this process of planning and handling the wealth of data sets. Alice mentioned it already. It's quite a lot of data. Is doing it in a geographic information system. And the reason why I'm emphasizing this is that also we as infrastructure developers and operators have been working quite a lot, with all respect, with pencil and paper to kind of make up our mind on possible infrastructure development, especially at sea. Onshore it works a bit different, but at sea it's really difficult to bring together all the different stakeholders and all the different information, have them in your head or in your expert group, and the best thing to go forward is automating these things work in a geographic information system. And why I'm emphasizing this so much, I will show you on one of the next slides. The next thing I would like to say is, and that's also addressing my own family a bit of TSOs, cross-border cooperation is not only valid for economic reasons. So think of the hybrid interconnections that we have been promoting and investigating a lot in the past for trade of electricity, frankly, and also for integration of offshore wind. But it's also urgently needed from a spatial point of view. Practical example from Germany, for instance, when we do infrastructure installations and development at sea, we compensate for the effect that we have on the seabed, for instance, or when we install platforms also during the construction period, we do compensation measures. But we need space for that. We need other sea areas at sea that we can still use and account for as being, compensated for what we did. And if you look at the map, you see that the German sea space is quite small. So finding compensation areas within our home waters basically is not impossible, but it's becoming increasingly challenging. And then, of course, you look at your neighbors and think like, oh, maybe we find areas over there to dedicate as compensation areas, and not just as a cheap excuse for our working and construction sites, but also for the sake of continuous conversation areas, right? It's more useful to have larger areas across countries than little bits and carpets everywhere, just for the sake of the accounting. So that's a practical example of what we mean by cross-border cooperation is also needed from a spatial planning point of view, not just from an infrastructure and an economics point of view. And lastly, obviously data goes without saying, but still it's important to mention that still today we do not have consistent and up-to-date data, especially across borders. Of course, we have it nationally, and we have updated processes, but then we have the language barrier, we have data incompatibilities, and sometimes also not open data that can be used by the different sectors. The energy sector has, of course, their data, and the shipping industry, they have their data. That is clear, but we need the interface. We need to bring them together, and the European Commission is doing a great job to push for that, but we're not yet there. Hence my call for attention here. So when I say we, I say Elia Group. 50 Hertz is part of the TSO family between Belgium and Germany, and we are active in both sea basins. Hence, I will also use my examples now for the North Sea and the Baltic Sea in my talk. If you would like to dig a bit deeper into the topics, I invite you to read the Going Like the Wind study here on the right-hand side. I'm going to share the link with you on the final slide also once more. From last year, almost exactly 1 year ago, we published this study, which among many other topics also touches upon the spatial planning and holistic aspect of offshore grid and wind farm development. Now, when I say we would like to use a geographic information system, I'm basically saying that we would like to make sense of this blue space on the left-hand side. So you see an example here of the Southern Baltic Sea, Germany in the south, Sweden in the north, and Denmark here in the west, and Bornholm, the island on the eastern side. And the idea of using a geographic information system for the identification of possible transmission lines, because that's what it is, what we are caring for as a TSO. Obviously, we would like to connect the wind farms and potentially other countries. We need a heat map. Alice already mentioned it. We need a heat map of opportunities and also constraints. Nobody likes to be referred to as a constraint, but frankly, we do have a conflicting or at least competing interests in the sea. You know, some are economic, some are for defense and security of the country, and some are for the natural conservation, to name a few, right? And it's not up to us, but up to a stakeholder process to define which interests are fine to overlap and which ones are competing for space, and there are sharp delineations. And then you have areas where you can go, where you have to go, and where you must not go, basically, right, with your infrastructure. And that we can, in the literature, we would call this penalty cost, but it's not a nice term. It's basically a calculation help that tells you, okay, you're going to have more easy time if you go here and a more difficult time if you go there. And this more difficult can mean it costs extra for compensation, it takes longer, it uses more material, or you have more stakeholders to engage, not even speaking of the permits that you need to get, right? And we're not saying that we can translate everything into a penalty cost, but at least a good deal of this information to reduce complexity and then be able to draw maps. And here on the right-hand side, you see an example of the blue wind farm areas that some exist already, some might exist, and some will probably not materialize. And you see the penalty cost structure or a heat map of constraints in different colors that give you an impression of how such things could work out in practice. Yeah. A bit more technical, maybe a very quick preview or sneak view into the workflow behind. So the ultimate goal for us is, of course, to optimize investment decision into any kind of infrastructure. In our case, it would be cables. For someone else, it would be pipelines. That doesn't really matter at this stage. It's really abstract for something that links A with B. And the GIS analysis is really in the beginning of this process. So the actual optimization you would still do in Plexus, for instance, or other software or processes for that matter, but the GIS analysis is a pre-analysis. So it's not doing the optimization, it's preparing it and enabling you to achieve a proper workflow. And here you have the data, this waffle you have of lots of data sets, of course, the maritime spatial planning, existing infrastructure, geographic base information. You define the wind farm locations, or they are defined already by the national planning process and procedures. You identify possible links among this heat map of opportunities between countries. So here in the south, there might be one country, and here in the north, put on the laser pointer to make it easier to follow. So this might be a substation onshore, and this one of a different country. And in between, you're going to have some wind farms that are in need for connection. And then you can identify possible links, not the perfect ones, but possible ones, and then, or feasible ones from a spatial point of view. And then you search for good ideas. So basically, you filter out those ones that you drop for reasons, be it for too long or too difficult or whatever. And then you have some ideas, a set of scenario options that go from A to B. It's a bit like Google Maps. You have a map and you can ask yourself where you go. And now you're not going on streets, but you're going in the sea between all the different activities that are along the way. And if you are done here, you have a list of options which you then can give to another process of optimization. Right? It's just a sketch of how such things could work. Not saying that we must follow it and that we do follow it at the moment, but this is something that we did in-house 2 years ago for a feasibility study. Okay, switching gears, 2 more slides on, let's say, the bigger picture. The most important input that you would need is this map or any kind of derivative of that, meaning that the blue sea has structure of all information that you would like to onboard in your analysis. In this case, we took the example of maritime spatial planning. So you have infrastructure corridors of existing or planned infrastructure. You have, of course, shipping lanes, protected areas. And the challenge at first was, of course, to draft this map in the first place, so to consult every single country to get the data, because there is no single source. And the second thing is to translate those usages. For instance, a protection area in Estonia might be differently interpreted and protected even in its hierarchy than in Germany or the UK for that matter, right? And sometimes you're not quite sure what is meant by protection in the first place. Is it Natura 2000? Is it the national park? Or, is it just a quote unquote a bird habitat? Or so it's really challenging, even if you have such a nice map, to really work with it. And that's actually where the time flies. It's not about the processing in the computer. That's quite fast. But agreeing on a common set of nomenclature is needed. We don't have that across borders. Yeah, we have that nationally. We have that maybe between neighbors or for single projects, but we don't have that on a standardized basis And if you don't have that, the most powerful algorithm won't save you. Yeah, that's just something we would need to sort out beforehand. And obviously, this map is now again 1 year old, so almost certainly things have changed. And of course, would be great to have them quite fast in your database to update. And then maybe last, a sneak preview, or not preview, but just for those of you who are not from Germany and not too familiar with the processes here, to give you an idea of how this works out in practice. In Germany, we have the authority of the Bundesamt für Seeschifffahrt und Hydrographie, BSH, which is the Maritime Spatial Planning Authority, you could coin it in this context. And they do two things, among many others, but two things that we are concerned with today is the spatial plan, where you basically assign different categories of usages here in the North Sea and Baltic Sea. And you see, Baltic Sea, little space. We need compensation areas, as mentioned at the beginning. And then the site development plan, Flächenentwicklungsplan, which basically spells out what you see here in orange placeholders, is then more detailed individual wind farms, connection systems, platforms, and even the auction schedule is basically derived from such areas. So it's a really stepwise process that goes in circles. So every couple of years, we have an update of each of the products, and then we restart again. And this is basically then the input that we use for our federal grid development plan to also allocate those capacities and optimize for the grid infrastructure. And of course, in a different country, those processes look different. And then again, we have this topic of keeping data up to date and always making sure that we have the latest status in the systems. Okay, yeah. With that being said, I would like to close the intervention. I hope you got an idea of how such things can look in practice. And if you're not into offshore wind, I still invite you to read the study because it's also quite a nice compendium for the energy sector as such and for the challenges of the energy transition from a European perspective. And with that, I close and thank you for your attention.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Felix, for this intervention and presentation. And with having this, I think we can move now to the last part of the webinar, to the Q&A, to the discussion. Especially that we already have some interesting questions that were put into the chat. So I would start. I will open the discussion also with the first of the questions as they were put into the chat. First one from Duncan, who mentioned and also posted some sneak peeks of already market-ready solutions for applying spatial optimization, and question about how to get engaged. So maybe I would say also considering what Duncan presented in his the slides and then the figures pasted into the chat. I think this refers and is relevant for both Alice and Felix. And Duncan, also please feel free to pose your question again if it was wrongly interpreted by me.
No, interpreted correctly. Thanks. Yeah. Essentially, yeah. As there, how do we engage in the way this is getting taken forward in the UK and then also European wide?
I go first. I mean, from my perspective, if you, I'm not sure if my email address has been shared as part of this, but I can do. I would say just get in contact with me and I can point you in the direction of the right people. Probably best for us.
Brilliant. Thanks. We'll do else. Okay. Yeah, we'll start there. And I guess more widely on the call, is this a wider initiative with other like system operators within Europe as well? Like, is that a cross collaboration effort that you're looking at?
Yeah, so from our side, we we are organizing such webinars or on other activities. So I would say the same as Alice. Please feel free to reach out to us, and we are open to many different kinds of collaboration. And I think that one of the objectives that we are following is to facilitate such knowledge exchange. So we also very much appreciate if knowledge and innovations are being shared. And the way how we would structure that and manage is just to be seen, but we are very open anyway. So please feel free to reach out directly to us.
Lovely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this. And then I would move to the next question from Andreas that was addressed to Alice as well. It's about the impact of public engagement activities as included in this strategic spatial and energy plan and their impact on the project-specific public engagement activities.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. We hope, and I think it's the intention, that the strategic spatial energy plan helps make the subsequent engagement or the project-specific engagement easier, because they can, hopefully the SSEP can provide that need for the infrastructure, and then the project-specific discussions are about those project-specific activities. I think the thing that also adds to this is that government has set out that its intention is for the SSEP to have status in planning regimes, which hopefully again sort of helps with that that smoothing the way to the project specific engagement that comes afterwards.
Great, thank you. And I see a thumb up from Andreas, so I think it was a very clear answer and no follow-up question on that front. And let's move to the next questions, also posed in the chat. Two questions posed by Laura. The first one is about the alignment with other initiative in the North Sea basin. Maybe we can start with this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So although we are in the SSEP looking at high-level network needs, we're not getting into the specific network solutions or designs. That's something that the next plan in the process, the the centralised strategic network plan, picks up. So it would be for that the network planning aspect to focus on that part. I know that my colleagues working on that do get involved or are involved in the I'm trying to think of the name of the group, the group that's been set up for the UK to engage in the North Seas cooperation, following us leaving the EU. So we are engaged in that process, but less so on the SSEP, more on the network side of things.
Thank you for this, and I think that you are referring to OTC, offshore.
Yes.
Transmission
Yes.
collaboration, and I'm sure that also 50 Hertz or Elia Group is a part of this collaboration as well. And the second question from Laura, I think this question is relevant to both of you, to Alice and to Felix. It's about to what extent, to what degree the planning of the system takes into account the different types of uncertainties, and some of them are mentioned. They could be treated differently, either as assumptions or input parameters, name it. But please feel free to answer.
Yeah, shall I go first again then? Yeah. So that is one of the challenges I'm sure we all have in planning the future, is that it's uncertain, and if we had a crystal ball it would be so much easier. So we try to in our analysis run lots of sensitivity tests to understand what the impact might be of different futures, whether that be different prices as a result of some of the drivers you've talked about, or whether that is availability of different feedstocks and things like that, so that hopefully we can get that idea of how robust to different futures our analysis is. We also are carrying out our analysis against 4 demand future views of demand going forward. So once we've selected sort of a headline, the 6 pathways, we will we will do some additional sort of looking at how robust they are across those different demand scenarios. And also we have agreed that we will set out sort of 2 elements in our results. So one is that we will have what we're calling a network planning line, so that we've got sort of one figure to feed into our centralized strategic network planning, but then also a range around it to reflect that that future is uncertain, so that hopefully, you know, it fits within that range of uncertainty. In terms of things like climate change impacts, we're looking at sort of availability of things like water and flood potential. I think that's certainly one of the bits we will look at in more detail in the second version of our SSEP. It's sort of something we're very aware of, have done to sort of some extent, but no, we need to think about that further in the next version.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this. And Felix, how does it look like from your side?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that this is not just relevant for the spatial planning challenges that we discussed today, but in most general terms, energy system planning for everything, especially when you're dependent on the weather. Here, I would like to highlight once more that we are, of course, doing the broader system development planning on the NSOE level, and there we indeed deploy different climate years, also projecting them into the future for accounting for climate change, be it temperature increases, be it different heat and cold spells, up to wind patterns and that sort of thing. I'm not sure if the weather data is publicly available. I think it is. It's drafted by DTU Copenhagen, quite a comprehensive data set. So that's your way to go in terms of checking such input data. And on the other aspects, geopolitical developments and demand side changes. By demand side, of course, electrical demand is something that we update every cycle. So both in the Federal Grid Development Plan nationally, but also internationally on the NSOE level for the TUNEP. Those are basically always a reflection of the expectations by the countries, and by countries I mean the governments, on the development of economic activity and power demand, frankly. And that is, of course, onboarded in such planning cycles. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Felix. And I would also add from my side that there is a very good open source data PCD, Pan-European Climate Database, for 5th version, if I'm not mistaken, that is also being used. It's publicly available. It's also being used for planning the European grid system as a service delivered by Copernicus. So for all the interested, there's also a good resource to have a look into that. The next question that was put into the chat is related to the use of Plexus and potential criticism. Robbie, would you like to elaborate on that, on your question?
I think there's a comment from Robbie saying he can't respond by video. He's having tech issues. So I'm happy to have a go at answering that question. So yes, I think is the answer. I think it's fair to say, yeah, you know, and that is something we have had that criticism or that challenge, shall we say. At the time we started developing the SSEP, that is the tool we had available to us in NESO, or the ESO National Grid ESO as we were then. And with the timescales, we needed to get on and do this with the tools we have in place. We are keeping under review the tools that we use for the next version of the SSEP, whether that's carrying on with Plexus and ArcGIS as we're doing now, or whether something combined or something completely different. So yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that is on our mind, and we will look at what's the best solution for the next version of the SSEP.
Perfect. Thank you for this. And there is the next question in the chat is about it's from Forart, and it's about common mapping platform, and also what Felix mentioned, Google Earth, Google Maps, and whether you have considered this as an input source for your work.
No, thanks for the remark. To be precise on Google Earth, no, we have not been using that. Not consciously excluding it, let's say, from our workflow so far. What I can say is that we made quite some good experience with the OpenStreetMap project, both in terms of using it as a data source, but also using open libraries, including to the software. For instance, we are working with QGIS on this file that I presented. So also open source software in the backend to do the analysis. But that was more of a practical decision. As I mentioned, we are not necessarily experts in this topic domain, but we are the users, and that was basically the main reason. What we are also concerned with is not just maps that show information, but also that we, of course, can acquire the geodata behind it, either through APIs or downloadable and shareable. And that is more easy, I must say, when you don't go to Google. That's to put it that way. Yeah.
Thanks, Felix. And Alice, maybe from your side, any considerations to the use Google Earth data?
So that is something I have to admit is not, it's not something that I'm aware of having explored, but it might be that something my team has sort of thought about and either, you know, discounted or thought to explore later. So apologies, I'm not, I know it's not what we're using, but I'm unsure whether that was considered in the earlier stages.
Okay, thank you for this. So let's move to the next question. We have a very active audience, what is very good for the webinar. And the next question is from Tanya. How do you view nature-related risks in the long-term viability of the energy assets, and whether, and if yes, how they are being factored in into the planning?
Thanks. So if I've understood the question correctly, so we in developing our strategic plan, we are understanding, you know, to get to different capacities of different technologies, sort of what the impact would be on different factors like, you know, habitats, things like that. So we are bringing that into account. If this is more to do with climate change, I think that's probably in the question I'd answered earlier, in that we are to some extent in this one, and we'll do further in future ones, but we are bringing into, you know, taking into account things like flood risk and the likes, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, and maybe before, thank you for this answer, and maybe before we move to the questions that were posed by Christian, there's I also had a question that relates to the one from Tanya, because you mentioned about a lot of collaborations and also advisory groups that you have established in order to make the entire process, but also the outputs relevant and realistic. And my question is whether in any of those specific advisory groups you are working in some environmental NGOs that are, and I see that you are nodding, because also 400 data sets that you mentioned about, I would assume that some of them could be delivered by some environmental NGOs.
Yes, so absolutely. One of our working groups is an environmental working group, and that has both our, sorry if I'm using a term that is less familiar outside the UK, but we have what we call our statutory nature conservation bodies, so the likes of Natural England, Natural Resources Wales, Nature Scotland, those which have that role, you know, given by government to provide that advice. But we also within that group have a couple of non-statutory organisations, so the Wildlife Trusts and also the RSPB, which I'm conscious is a member of this group. And then some of those, so yes, we very much get their input there, and it is getting that balance between sort of that planning at the strategic level that we're doing versus sort of what needs to be considered at the project specific level. And then also think in some of our societal groups, we've got some more of those non-governmental or environmental organisations within there who can sort of provide their input as well.
Yeah. Felix, please go ahead.
Yeah. I would also add both to the previous question, but also your question, Andre. So generally, we are very aware of this issue and also challenge of, as I mentioned also in my intervention already, on compensation, but actually it's much more diverse than that, right? So we have compensation, but we also have substitute measures, we have avoidance measure, coherence measures. So for every single bit of the journey, of the planning journey, the construction itself, and the lifetime existence of the asset, and then also potentially the removal of the asset from the sea, we have different categories of measures that are also on different levels of governance regulated. So on a national level or European or individual on project level. By the way, we have a comprehensive table in our study that I would recommend you consulting, because there we define all of them very clearly and give examples on where this is applied or there has been applied in the past. And the bottom line of that table is called nature inclusive design, which is also proactively designing, in this case, offshore infrastructure, but it's also very much true for onshore assets as well in many cases, to not only undo what you have been done to nature, but also proactively do something that natural habitats form more easily. First demonstrated now with the Belgium Princess Elizabeth Island, an artificial island that our colleagues erect in the North Sea, but it's not tied to islands. You can apply nature inclusive design in many different contexts, but for us as a company, let's say it's the first example of such a deployment.
Yeah, thank you very much for this input, Felix, and I will paste into the chat also a link to Ocean, Offshore Coalition for Energy and Nature. That is a coalition facilitated by RGI. It's a coalition of transmission system operators, also wind developers, and environmental climate NGOs that are dealing very specifically with offshore infrastructure. And on this website, you can find also the database or practices related to nature inclusive design, and many of the examples that are being implemented by developers across the world. And I would also add from our side, from RGI side, because that's also the topic that we are dealing with extensively, how to integrate this the planning of the system while taking nature and spatial constraints into account. And I would add that also what we observe, at least at the European scale, and the differences how the system is being planned offshore and onshore, is that within the currently existing regulation, offshore grid planning in different sea basins in Europe is directly connected with maritime special planning, which explicitly includes already nature protected areas. It's not necessarily the case in looking into infrastructure gaps and system needs for the future, as being currently done by NSOE. The current regulation does not require such considerations. But there is eagerness and willingness for different actors to look how these approaches could also be combined onshore. So this is ongoing process, and if there is interest for any of the audiences, also please feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to continue the conversation. Okay, so let's move now to the questions that were posed by Christian. So 3 questions, all of them addressed to Alice. The first one is about different zones and the regions, and the inclusion of zonal pricing to look and identify grid bottlenecks.
Yeah, so I don't know how many of the audience were aware that zonal pricing was under consideration for quite some time in GB. and the decision was recently taken by the government not to progress with zonal pricing and instead sort of reform the national pricing approach that's in place. And actually the SSEP has been placed at the heart of that with signals to help improve the investment or the sort of the location, so the investment signals for generation and storage being linked to the SSEP. So that sort of, yes, it would help with the outcomes, but as I say, that's the government's decided to do that in different ways. But I guess in terms of the planning, we have our modelling takes a zonal approach, so that's irrespective of it's neutral to the market structure, but that does recognise that whatever the market structure is, there will be a cost to transport energy between zones, electricity primarily we're thinking of here, and whether sort of reflect whether there is enough network in place or not. So that would either come through those costs if there was a zonal market in those different zonal prices, or actually with the national market as it currently is, those reflect the costs that you would see that we incur as the system operator in terms of constraints or congestion charges. So we have in effect used that sort of zonal model as a proxy for there are costs to transfer electricity between zones, and helping understand that trade-off between whether it's right to manage those as constraint costs or whether it's right to get that network in place. And that sort of feeds into the network needs and helps with that trade-off around the location as well. So hopefully that helps.
Great, thank you, Alice. Let's go to the second question from Christian. It's about consideration to decommissioning the fossil gas distribution grid.
I've just spotted the word distribution. I was going to say the SSEP itself doesn't look at the grid, the gas network. That'll be picked up by our centralised strategic network plan, and whether sort of the ongoing role that's for the gas transmission grid. The distribution grid, I would have thought, would come into our regional energy strategic plans, because they are feeding into the gas and electricity distribution plans. So not the SSEP, but it will come from our regional energy strategic plans, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this answer.
Sorry, just a follow-up question. You mentioned the gas grid or the general gas grid is planned in which plan or which strategy again?
The centralised strategic network plan. I can drop you a link to our draft methodology on that if you'd like. So that's a plan that will cover the electricity, hydrogen and natural gas networks.
Just to understand, how does that fit together with the SSEP?
So the SSEP is an input, so that we provide the generation and demand to feed into that, then the specific network planning, and we also give that view of high-level network needs.
Thank you.
Okay.
And also thank you, Christian, for joining the discussion. And then we have the last question from your side is related to the distributed generation and how its development in the future will impact the SSEP.
Yes, I mean, you're probably aware that we have seen much more decentralization or distributed generation on the GB network, and the expectation is that will continue to play a role in developing the SSEP. Some of our technologies, where it is appropriate, we are sort of agnostic. Well, we will sort of divide it in to feed into the centralised strategic network plan into transmission and distribution, but we're looking both at transmission and distribution connected solar, onshore wind and storage, so that we are bringing that into our consideration. Where there is sort of not grid connected or some of those other smaller technologies, they will be brought into those regional energy strategic plans.
Great, thank you. So you're expecting more onshore wind then as well in future in the UK?
Potentially, yes. Well, let's see what the plan comes out with, but it's certainly a consideration in it.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you also, Christian, for joining the discussion. And I think that we went through all of the questions included in the chat. Are there any other questions from the audience to ask Alice and Felix? I don't see any hands raised, but I would have a couple of questions more since we still have some time. The first one is about the final results, the final outputs that you will have in several months, also after defining those 4 to 6 different scenarios, and also how they will be translated into the spatial use. Are you planning, maybe I missed it, maybe you mentioned about it, but are you planning to develop any interactive dashboards that would be available for the public to explore these scenarios? And yes, I see you're nodding, so I will give you the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will have interactive maps that will allow people to sort of step through the years or understand different technologies. We're just working on exactly what they look like, but that's our intention.
Mm-hmm. And will these tools also allow to collect input that would then influence any project-based activity? Or
sorry, what are you thinking by that? If you can just expand.
So I'm also thinking about the level of detail that will be presented, and also whether it will be interactive only to present the results, or also interactive in a way that public or the stakeholders could deliver input about then the location of the line at the project base level.
Yeah, so I imagine this is stuff we're working through at the moment. I imagine they'll be interactive at that zonal level rather than being down to any more granular, although we do need to have a think about what level of detail we provide on those spatial heat maps around sort of availability and opportunities. I think current thinking is they'll be based on outputs rather than inputs, but we will make as many of the inputs as we can available in what we're calling a data book. Alongside the consultation, we'll have either signposts to where data has come from, or that data included there. And actually, we're starting to starting this month, we'll be getting some of that input data out there now, because we know industry is very keen to have the transparency of that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this, and maybe the last question from my side, since also as mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, as RGI, we are supporting different formats and means of collaboration, and I was also wondering whether within the scope of those 400 different data sets, whether you are collaborating with NSOE, with the continental Europe, also outside of the format of the OTC, to feed your data, to collect your input data, also maybe to foresee how the demand would be then developed in the continental Europe, because there are linkages and other planned for the UK. So having this data would allow you for better planning. And I'm just wondering, how does it look like? And
yeah, good question. So I would imagine, I know we've had conversations with NSOE and both sort of directly and through the OTC. If I'm honest, I'm not aware of how much of that is about sort of data sharing. In terms of sort of how we have been interacting specifically for the SSEP, in terms of interconnector capacity, we've had conversations with those potential connecting TSOs to sort of understand sort of the direction of travel in those countries, to help make sure that we're not, suggesting that we want another, I'm making this number up, 10 gigawatts to a particular country when there's absolutely no appetite for that to happen. So trying to sort of understand that perspective to bring into the SSEP.
Perfect. So thank you for these answers, and we still have 5 minutes, and according to our agenda, we should wrap up. But I will just ask for the last time if there are any final questions from the audience. I don't see any, so I think that or there is one. No, it's just a comment. Thank you. But so if that's so, there no question more. I would like to conclude today's webinar. I would like to say many thank you to our two great speakers, to Alice and Felix, for sharing their knowledge, for sharing their approaches when it comes to optimized spatial planning. As mentioned at the beginning, the presentation as well as the recording will be available on RGI website and on our YouTube channel. And as my colleague Natalia mentioned in the chat, and as you can see in the slide, we also encourage you to sign up to our newsletter, when you will get regularly updated about ongoing activities, webinars, workshops. And we are also very open to other collaborations. So feel free to reach out to us if you would like to have a work on any projects with us. So having said that, thank you very much for today, for joining the webinar, and we will be in touch. Have a nice rest of the afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.